Hi, I am CA Vijay Kedia. In today's video, I'm going to talk about a three bucket withdrawal strategy, which I am planning to follow for early retirement. So the question here is, why do we need an withdrawal strategy? So if somebody is taking regular retirement, which is 60 plus, then probably they need to manage their fund for 15, 20 years. Uh, and in that case, even if you go for a conservative instruments and you don't actually need that growth in your portfolio. But in case of early retirement, you need to be conservative for your immediate financial needs, and at the same time you need a growth in your portfolio for your long term needs. And that's the reason you need to divide your assets into different buckets, so that you can have the funds for your immediate and medium term financial needs, and the funds which you need for long term that can continue to grow, right? And then in this video, I'll talk about the strategy which I am going to follow. It's not a financial advice. Different people might follow a different strategy. So some might go for a more conservative approach. Some may follow an aggressive approach. For some, short term might be 3 years. For some, short term might be just 2 years, right? So we need to uh, refine it based on your risk profile and your investment strategy. But eventually, everybody would need a bucket strategy if they are going for early retirement, because you need to have a plan in place when you are going to manage that fund for 35, 40 years, right? So with that, let's dive into the details. What is the three bucket withdrawal strategy? First bucket, you need to maintain for your short term needs, your regular day to day expenses, which is going to be there for next 2 years, plus any other expense which you see you might need to incur in next 2 years. For example, if you're planning to replace your car in next 2 years, and that might be an additional expense, so that you need to consider in your short term expense. So for example, if your annual expenses are is 10 lakhs, and then for 2 years you need 20 lakhs, you need probably say 10 lakhs to upgrade your car. So you need to consider that 30 lakh for your short term bucket, right? The next is your medium term bucket. So medium term, I'm considering medium term as 2 to 5 years. Some people might consider it 3 to 7 years, right? So I'm just explaining the different buckets, but the number of years can be different depending on how comfortable you are with those buckets, right? So uh, now in 2 to 5 years, whatever expenses you are going to incur, and that can also, apart from your regular expenses, that can also include your other expenses. For example, if your kid is going to college, and then you might need to incur expenses for higher education, so those expenses also you need to consider in your medium term bucket, and that will follow a different investment strategy compared to a short term bucket, right? So that we'll discuss in the subsequent slide. And the last is the long term bucket. Here I'm considering 5 plus years as the long term bucket. Some people take it as 7 plus years. Uh, but the idea here is whatever expenses you don't need in the short or medium term, that money should continue to grow, so that you continue to beat inflation, your corpus is growing, and you don't end up in a situation where you don't have money to fund your expenses few years down the line. So you need that growth, and that growth can be achieved through your long term bucket. Now let's go to the short term bucket. So short term bucket, the purpose is that it should be able to cover your immediate living expenses for 2 years, and as I said, if there is any other expense which you are foreseeing for next 2 years, that should also be part of this. And then what kind of assets you should put that money in. So for example, I prefer putting that in high yield saving accounts, like IDFC First Bank. There they provide 7% plus interest on balances above 5 lakhs, and then similar returns you can get from liquid fund also. But I'm more comfortable with that saving bank account, because that gives me a flexibility to withdraw anytime, and then I also use that money for directly applying for IPOs in that from that bank account. So that's my reason to go for like an high yield saving account. But you can also consider liquid funds, and even if I want to get slightly higher return, I can even go for FD. So basically, you need to put your money in low risk instruments, and you can expect like 5-6% kind of return, post tax return. So if you're getting 7%, your post tax return should be around 5-6%, and so that's the kind of return you'll get. It should be like around inflation. It may not beat the inflation, but that's not the idea here. Idea here is that the fund should be available for your immediate needs, so it should be low risk and it should be easily accessible. The next is your intermediate bucket, right? So in the intermediate bucket, I'm considering the expenses which are required in next 2 to 5 years, right? Now these expenses, uh, I cannot take a very high risk, but at the same time I want that bucket to beat the inflation, right? So what I do is I invest that money into conservative hybrid funds, which is like 20 to 25% equity, rest is in the debt. Or some aggressive investors might also consider balanced hybrid funds, which invest up to 50% in equity and 50% in debt, right? And even your EPF, if you have EPF balances, that can also be considered as part of your medium term bucket, because that EPF also we can withdraw if you have left your job and then the money is there in EPF, that can be withdrawn. I have not considered it as part of the first bucket because withdrawal takes time. It might, in some cases, it might take a month. But idea here is that in the bucket one, you should be able to withdraw that fund immediately. So, and that's why I'm putting EPF, or even for that matter PPF, right? If it's maturing in next 2 to 5 years, that fund also be considered in your intermediate bucket. And then I'm expecting 8 to 10% kind of return, depending on whether I'm going for conservative fund or a balanced fund. Even EPF offers 8% kind of returns. So overall, this is the kind of return I would expect from my intermediate bucket. And so the idea here is that I'm able to take a moderate risk since I have like this 2 to 5 years to span, and at the same time, I'm able to beat the inflation. Next is the long term growth, right? So finally, the long term expenses which are beyond 5 years, I'm classifying that as in a long term bucket, and that fund I can take some risk, and I can, because I need that money to grow and to cover my long term expenses. So what I do is I invest in index funds, right? Again, the aggressive investors can also go for flexi cap funds, uh, even some exposure to direct stocks. And I'm also considering NPS as part of this long term growth, because NPS you can take up to 75% exposure in equity. So NPS is as good as equity. So that should be considered as part of your equity portfolio, and that's why I'm considering that under long term bucket. And here I'm expecting 12% plus return. So 12% is the conservative estimate considering index fund. But yeah, if you go for flexi cap funds, direct stocks, the return can be even higher. But that's the minimum return I'm expecting. That return would help my portfolio to grow. That will help me to meet my future expenses. The idea of this bucket is that I'm taking a slightly higher risk, but I am focused on growth, so that my overall portfolio can be used for longer term. So this was the three bucket strategy I wanted to share with all of you. As I said earlier, this is very specific to your risk profile. So whether you are doing it yourself or taking help of a financial advisor, you would eventually need a three bucket strategy if you are going for an early retirement. So I hope you found this video useful. If yes, please hit the like button. Please do share with your friends and family as well. and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.